Good morning, everybody. That's past, so I think we'll just kick off. Thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to this IP inclusive event, and we're very pleased to see you all in a rather dreich and a miserable Friday morning, but hopefully we'll be able to brighten up the end of the week for you. So thank you again for joining us. You'll have seen from the invitation that this is an IP inclusive event, and we are going to be speaking about promoting inclusivity in the workplace and how the recent ways we've been working, particularly post-pandemic, have affected that, and what the challenges and opportunities presented for business are. So as I mentioned, it is a panel session, and I'm joined by our rather esteemed panel. Just by way of introduction, we have Helen Archibald, who's Chief Operating Officer at Murgitroyd, trademark and patent attorneys. Helen leads their business operations across their network. She's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, and she's a background in business management, operations leadership, and organisational development. Our second panel member is Rachel.Jones, founder and CEO of SnapDragon IP. I think Rachel can probably lay claim to the best job title ever. She's Head of Dragon at SnapDragon IP. I think Peter Jones would even be jealous of that job title. But Rachel heads an international team, and they're dedicated to online brand protection. And last year, SnapDragon was awarded the Queen's Award for Enterprise in Innovation. And last but by no means least, our third panel member is Thomson, founder of Hey Legal. Ali's a non-practicing solicitor who's been working on online projects for the last 15 years. Ali teaches law, technology and innovation to diploma students at the University of Glasgow. So we'll be quite keen to hear from Ali in terms of what the youth of today think of the current state of affairs. And Ali set up Hey Legal in 2020 to provide an innovative platform for Scottish lawyers. And last year won the Support Team of the Year at the Scottish Legal Awards. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts as we go along. Obviously, the title of this morning's event was The Way We Work Now, Promoting Inclusivity or Leaving Some Behind. So I was going to start by just throwing that open to our panel members and seeing if they had any general thoughts on whether we are leaving some behind, or whether the current way we're working, more flexible working, actually promotes inclusivity. And to use a horrible phrase, does it encourage levelling up? So over to our panel members. Helen, perhaps you want to kick us off?
Happy to, thanks Lynn, and good morning to everyone. There's no single line answer to that, Lynn, is there? I think we would like it to be an opportunity to help us with the whole levelling up agenda, but I think there's stuff we have to actively do to make that a reality. And one of the things, just by way of sort of scene setting and kicking off, that I think we need to make sure we don't do is to see or assume everyone's experience through the lens of the leadership team. Because those of us in leadership teams tend to be really not very diverse. I know I'm not speaking for every single leadership team in Scotland or across the land, but I think it is factually true to say that in terms of background, socio-economic background, and all sorts of other things. So I think that would be my kind of kickoff point. Let's start from there. Let's not assume or let's not fall into the trap of seeing it through our personal lens in terms of our lives and lived experiences, and in terms of what we need for the business. Just go out and talk to half a dozen people, make it as diverse a group as possible, and you'll get half a dozen different stories about their wants and needs in terms of the future of their working life. Mm-hmm. Over to someone else.
Shall I jump in? Sorry, right, I don't want to jump in on you're about to, Ali, but yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Helen. I think, and I think in our team we have a team of 30, 14 nationalities, and age a diverse age range, and socioeconomics, a bit of a range, I have to say as well. But I think actually in many ways it's less about when folks are with us, because actually we recruit well, and I think from a diversity point of view very well. But actually it's finding the people and encouraging people that might not think that they could apply in the first place. And I think actually, given what the youth have been through, I mean, I know that we've all had a pretty tough time, but actually I'm particularly worried about the next generation coming through, folks who are, who didn't quite manage to finish school and have tried to, get into the workplace or go into university and haven't managed to go, and all of these kind of things. And how are we going to encourage them that the world is open for them all? So I think we really need to absolutely look at the teams we've got, but we need to absolutely look at the teams that we will have in the future, or our businesses will have in the future, and how we can be inclusive for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Ali.
Yes, thank you both. Very, very strong points. I agree entirely about not looking through the prism of a leadership team, or even looking at it sometimes from a business perspective and looking at it more as a societal thing. I think the answers lie there. I do a lot of work around law and technology, and we need to look at systems, perhaps criminal justice system or the licensing board, and how they've used technology and how people have access to that. And sometimes it's very easy as leaders, I suppose, in some sense, to think of people as being just the same as us, that they've got internet access, that they are engaged, that they have got really devices in which they can readily access these things in time to do it, and also an environment from which they can log in and do these things. So I think that we need to think of absolutely everyone as we go forward, and that the prize lies in doing so. And that works for society, but also works for our own businesses, so that we're bringing in, very much a diverse teams. And there are massive opportunities that lie ahead, and we'll cover that in the questions coming up for business around how we go about bringing diversity into our teams and different ways of thinking. I mean, you mentioned about the university, and the students there and how they think about the world, and and that's a fascinating area. Some of them are visionaries and some of them actually aren't. They just use technology so naturally they haven't really thought about it at all, and even its possibilities. So I think obviously the future lies in harnessing technology to its full extent and bringing as many people in, but we just need to work quite hard at it, I think.
I think something that you've all touched on there is the different experience that people had, and that's certainly one of the comments that I've heard, where you see people on Zoom and it's a very different experience for somebody that's flat sharing and sitting at their kitchen table than it is, you've got a young person who's then having a conversation with someone in the leadership team who's sitting in their study with the door closed, and it makes it a very different experience. We do have a comment from Alan. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Alan has commented that does this need to be a joint approach, and whether there's a greater onus on males in senior leadership roles to adapt to that. Alan, do you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, happy to expand on that. I think my perception is that we've been trying to increase diversity, gender diversity, for decades, and it's moving at a snail's pace. And I think one of the issues that we have is that there's still far too many senior leadership roles held by men. And there's an expectation set. Now, I know it is changing, but again, it's changing very, very slowly. There's an expectation set that you have to work an incredible amount of hours. You have to be 100% committed to the role. There's not a lot of flexibility available. And I think that's one of the things that needs to change, this attitude to, if you're going to be a senior leader, you basically have to give up your personal and social life, unless the social life overlaps with business conversations, expense accounts and all that kind of stuff. And I just think, is there a greater onus on the males in senior leadership teams to embrace more flexibility and accept that their role doesn't have to be done 70 or 80 hours a week? It can be done on a part-time basis. It can be done on a job sharing basis. It's just that type of thing, and move away from this big boys club. That you know, there's a perception that it's a big boys club, and you have to be a member of the club. That's my point, basically.
I'll come back on that. Alan, it was me commenting that I'd like to hear what you had to say more on that. Certainly, what one thought is there greatest onus on men? Well, yes, because as a matter of fact, there are more of them in leadership teams than there are women. So in that regard, yes, there's greater onus because there's more. I do agree with your point, but I'd like to sort of extrapolate it further, because these things you're talking about, these good things about more flexibility, about moving away from doing it one way. As you say, we're already starting to move away, but it's far, far too slow. But that's for the good of everybody, isn't it? You know, I wouldn't want to connect that argument to one which kind of keeps this kind of systemic thinking. I'm talking very in general terms here, not what every single person around this table is thinking, but in very general terms, systemically, it is women who are at home more with more domestic burden and caring burden and all that kind of things. So I wouldn't want to link that argument directly to that, because I think that sort of feeds that thinking. But I think the argument is a good one more broadly in terms of it not being done the way that you know, it probably is still working in a lot of places, a lot of industries, arenas, sectors, which are primarily still being run by older, white, generally men.
Could I jump in there as well? I mean, my background is not in HR at all in any shape or form, but one of the things that I've been taught, and I do mean taught in terms of a team, is about thinking about the role rather than the people. So if there was just a much more general understanding in businesses, whether they be legal or not, that actually this is about a role, and the first question is, can the role be done on a part-time job share basis, then that is absolutely key, I think. And that's actually one of the things that we always, because we are a small business and we were bootstrapped to start with, I was always looking for the best value that I could possibly get, and I couldn't afford you know, full-time people who were senior. So the most sensible thing to me seemed to be to recruit part-time people. And I have to say that the part-time brains of working parents or working carers, or people that were doing something else, were those that I could afford and those I valued beyond all. Because there's nothing wrong with people's brains when they may take a few years off to do childcare, they want to come back into the workplace, they had senior roles, and actually they can have a senior role with me because actually we're incredibly flexible. But that's because the role, when we started thinking about the roles, we thought, well, it doesn't need to be done full time, and actually we can't afford that. So if more people thought like that, and I think it's incredibly sad. I mean, I am not a lawyer, but it really worried me over the pandemic that a couple of the law firms that we were working with were expecting their partners to be homeschooling and working full time at the same time, just from a fee earning basis. And actually, morally, I felt really awful asking them to do things, because you know, they had small children at home and they had to homeschool. And I just thought, well, actually, that is the priority. I shouldn't be the priority. I absolutely get the business case here, but I don't really approve of you, Mr. Law Firm, because of the way you're making these people deliver the service to me. And they're having to, I mean, I was working all hours as well, but that's my decision. It's my business. But actually, I didn't feel that was particularly well handled, and subsequently have parted company with that law firm because morally I'm not on the same line as them. Now, I think that's a difficult one, and I'm sorry to bare my soul about it, but actually I do think in the profession that's something that needs to be talked about. Sorry. Oh, shut up.
Rachel, I think that those are absolutely brilliant points, and I think I would say, in a very general sense, you know, we are living through a revolution. You know, we are. If you think about it, I don't know, in a law firm between 1980 and 2000, I don't know how much really changed. Not very much, I don't think at all. We had that hierarchical system, same types of people in boardrooms, all of that stuff, and then with really, I think, technology. And if you think back, 2007 is the iPhone. Look at the impact that the way things have done. Look at the way people can set up businesses now and employ people and reinvent services. And the relationship that people have with work especially obviously the pandemic has brought that to focus, but the relationship people have has been thought about in a way that just has, I don't think, ever been thought about before. And what happens is, like you have, Rachel, you know, a company is set up by someone who wants to have visionary leadership and set an example, you know, for the role. You know, they want, you know, they can see how people can work in that environment in a really, I'm going to say modern way, which is a very generic way of describing it, but you might think of these roles in a completely different way. There'll be, you know, flexible working, you know, employing solely on talent, you know, ability to get the job done for a startup that you just need the work done. Who will do it for me? It doesn't matter who they are or where they are. Do they have the skill set to move the business forward? And that ends up building out a team. And what we can find in legal, and I don't want to be a lawyer bashing at all, but you know, we've had a situation where the pandemic has happened and it showed you that there was no disaster planning for the type of, you know, a need for a technological solution around a lot of what was going on. And then law firms praised themselves because they moved to use technology they actually had for years, but had just never really interrogated, you know, in terms of just using, you know, basic remote working technology or whatever. And it may well be that in order, if we're talking about the legal sector, if we are, you know, that those in the boardrooms currently are perhaps ill-suited to being the ones that redesign what the business is ultimately or should be. And customers are going to shape that, as you've done, Rachel. Customers, you know, will ultimately move to firms that have got diverse boardrooms, smart working practices, do actually embrace well-being. You get a lot of it's World Mental Health Day, and we're all great, and we've got a charter, but are you actually doing it? You know, and that might be controversial, but I think hopefully customers can shape the businesses that go forward as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, one of the things we did in February was we offered the whole team training in mental health first aid. And although that was a huge investment for the business, if that helps one person in the business or somebody they love, that matters enormously. It couldn't have been a better investment, and half of the business took us up on it. It was a whole week out of life. Big investment. February, not fantastic from a cash flow point of view, but mental health and well-being needs to be at the forefront absolutely every single day.
Yeah, I mean, we live in very, you know, these are very hostile times. I did see something on social media that said, I thought it was quite good, where it said, can you believe that 20 years ago we thought that whether building the Millennium Dome or something was actually a matter of national discussion, whereas, you know, now we have moved into a world. I mean, some of the news headlines, if you'd seen them 20 years ago, would have just seemed fantastical, and people are getting buffeted, you know, personally, work-wise, and really need, you know, careful employment. I think, you know, the employers need to nurture staff and be very emotionally intelligent, I think, around all aspects of the employer-employee relationship and how they shape businesses, really.
I was interested to hear your comments, Rachel. I think probably across a lot of professions, there's a perception that good client service is being available at all times on demand, essentially. And it's interesting to hear that perhaps some clients are looking for something different, and that kind of, you know, the well-being of the staff, the people that you're working with, is actually an important part of what clients are looking for. So that's a very different perspective, I think, and good to hear that. I mean, do you think flexible working encourages that sort of being able to work around your home commitments and not necessarily the traditional kind of 9 to 5, if it ever was actually 9 to 5, but being able to do things at different times but still have the same quality of output?
Shall I start answering that? I'll go for it. I think that flexible working encourages visible and invisible flexibility, and we all know about, you know, what both of those are. And I think from the point of view of just getting the job done by the people who can do it and who enjoy doing it and who are rewarded for doing it, that's absolutely key. I think the thing which has worried me the most has been lack of actual people interaction, because we've spent far too much time in front of our screens. But on the other hand, you know, we have members of our team who are freelancers with us, but who are wheelchair users and couldn't use our old office because the loo was downstairs and we couldn't get them downstairs. So actually, you know, we've always worked like this. And I just think that some people are happy to talk about the flexibility and the fact they're coming in late because they have to put washing on or let the, you know, plumber. That's absolutely fine. But we don't need, you know, I think the fact there's a good thing that those excuses are now no longer seen as excuses. We can just be much more open and honest about the numbers of things that we are all juggling. And actually, I think that is a really good thing. And that you can, you know, it's about to be dark, clock's about to go back, it's going to be dark, you know, darker than ever. So we're now doing a thing on a Tuesday from November to February. We start every Tuesday an hour later. No matter what time you start an hour later. You get that hour to do yoga or put the washing on or shopping or sleeping or whatever else it is. And nobody needs an excuse about why they're coming in an hour late. You know, that's just the way we are. And I just think we should all be encouraging that at all times. People work beyond their 40-hour week or 35-hour week all the time. And those that go that little bit further, whether within those hours or not, are the people who you want to hang on to.
You mentioned there about people, for example, with mobility problems. You know, it's not always easy to come into particularly older buildings that aren't set up for that sort of thing. You know, be interested to hear everybody in the panel's views in terms of, do you think working from home, for example, gives greater opportunities to people who wouldn't necessarily consider having gone for that job, whether it's because of those sort of issues or whether it's because they live in more rural areas? Does it open up opportunities to people that perhaps couldn't afford to live and work in a city?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that's a great hope, isn't it? That it does open more doors for more people. I guess at the moment we're probably working on just what we think is possible, and maybe a bit of anecdotal. I guess what will be seen is over the next few years what the actual employment data looks like on that. So let's wait and see. But meantime, if that is our great hope, then we need to be doing something about it to try and enable that. And I think these kinds of discussion and sort of knowledge sharing are excellent things to contribute to that whole piece of work.
Yeah, well, I think you know, absolutely. Obviously, senior leaders in businesses are now looking beyond their doorstep and the need for someone to be able to commute in and saying where's the skill set, and that covers all sorts of functions in the business. And if I could look, something that I think is of relevance here, because I'm involved in teaching, as I said, teaching at the university. I think it's very interesting how universities and educational institutes have dealt with this challenge. The course that I'm involved in, we actually used, it's the 4th year of it, and we used Zoom to teach the students to be involved in creating an online learning environment. And it means anyone can obviously come in to the course from anywhere really, and they're not having to bring them, you know, to Glasgow University and be in halls or in flats, whatever. But the wider point is that I thought this was an amazing stat that Harvard University, when it first opened up its online, and it's a very, very advanced online offering, I think it was in 2013, there was criteria that you require, you're required to be able to apply to be on this course. And from across the globe, the number of people who applied, who would have been able to be taken onto the course if there was sufficient resource, if they had all been accepted, the number of people taught on that course would have exceeded the number of people that Harvard University had taught in its entire history, which I thought was amazing because it showed you how you took it away from physical location, from a particular wealth background. Very often you need to be physically proximate to Harvard, you need to have money to go there, you need to, it's been a conveyor belt to maybe get you there. And suddenly you say, someone can log in from anywhere in the globe and access that institute of learning. And that would build out a much more diverse Harvard type graduate who's across the globe. And then if I take it a step further, that type of learning spread out, businesses can think in the same way, which is that we can just, why can't your director of marketing, if you're living in Scotland, but why can't, and yeah, I know there's a time frame, but if they're in New Zealand, so what? If they're wherever they are, so what? And bring people in. That then brings the challenge of a dispersed workforce and bringing all of that together. But it means that people's physical proximity and their physical attributes or whatever it will be, they're irrelevant, really, as long as they're catered for within the work role. People can just get on with it, and you get, it's an amazing time for a business if it can think in this way to bring in that level of talent and diverse thinking. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
And just add to that, absolutely, but brilliant points there, Alistair. In terms of the global distribution of people, our leadership team, I'm at Murgitroyd IP, we're a global business. When we get the leadership team together, it's across time zones. It's from, away over in the west coast of the US, over to the furthest east is maybe Milan. Don't quote me on that, but it's possibly Milan. Don't know if there's anywhere further east than that, and we make that work really, really well. And I guess we've got our own little version of the general point that's being made here. There are 30 of us on this call. I'm going to hazard a guess. It's my first meeting here, which I'm delighted to be invited to. But I'm going to hazard a guess that if this used to be in person, or a version of this used to be in person, that there wouldn't have been 30 people that all pitched up in one place at 8:30 in the morning. And of course, we'll have 30 different sets of circumstances here as well that, either enabled us to do that or didn't enable us to do that. So I guess that's just one example of the broader point.
Do you think, Ali, you mentioned there Harvard and the numbers of people that would be able to enroll in the course if we weren't talking about kind of geographical or wealth restrictions or anything like that. Do you think there's any resistance from, not necessarily Harvard, but institutions like that who kind of almost want to preserve that sense of exclusivity? Is that perhaps a barrier there as well?
Yes, I think, absolutely. I mean, change is difficult, for anyone, it does require, these institutions obviously have had a particular business model. It's very much based on a physical footprint. As it's a centre of excellence in a particular location. They're all designated by and large by where they are, and suddenly you've got a situation that says, well, look, maybe we need to reconsider all of this. And there is a change ongoing, but it does take time. But really the real prize does lie in saying we have, and going forward, I've got absolutely no doubt that these institutions will, gravitate towards a really fantastic online, hybrid version of what it is that they have to offer, and that really should build out a global audience for them. It's just not going to be physically restricted. So I think we're seeing in tandem here, education, but also business. Just saying, right, so we have, I started in a legal environment. We basically would recruit people that lived in Glasgow and around Glasgow. That's it, because it wasn't really viable to do much beyond that, really, for our type of business. And now it's exceptionally easy to do so. So I think we will see. I mean, I said about a revolution. It really is such a small time frame that we've had massive change and opportunity around technology. We haven't even got started in relation to what lies ahead. We haven't got started, and that brings a fear factor because it's obviously change, but it also brings massive opportunity. And the idea, I'm very quickly, but my son looked at computer gaming at Abertay University, and I was very struck by the promotional material that they had, because it's a kind of world-leading course, that it was Ubisoft, who are one of the biggest games. It's a massive, massive industry. One of the companies that produce these massively successful games, and they said, we wait every year with excitement to see what the graduates are going to bring into our business, because they think differently. And if those graduates are coming from across the globe as well with the required skill set, you can see how a business could really be transformed in terms of diversity, and also for the workforce, that they get opportunities to work with a company that's based in Edinburgh or Dundee, but is world leading, but they actually live in Buenos Aires, and I think that's just tremendously exciting, really.
Can I just jump in on that? Surely that's how we should all be thinking. I mean, surely the whole benefit of diversity is that people think differently. Now, if we all think the same way, we're all going to solve problems in the same way. So absolutely, that is why I absolutely do recruit age, creed, nationality, whatever, because people think differently. And the biggest mistake I ever made when I set up my first business 25 years ago was exactly as you said. Everybody came from Edinburgh, and they never really looked out, hadn't travelled much. And actually, we now don't recruit anybody if they don't mention travel on their CV. And I don't mind if it's just going from Edinburgh to Glasgow. If it has moved people out of their comfort box and they have looked up and out, then that's, for me, travel. And so nobody gets interviewed and hasn't been for 25 years unless there's some mention of that sort of aptitude.
I think we need to be a little careful around even what's happening behind applications, and there are a lot of organisations, increasing amount of organisations. I'm really pleased to know about that are doing work on that end of social mobility. So the people, because there are people out, I live near Dundee. There are kids in Dundee who've never been out of Dundee, and it's not because they don't dream big enough. It's because their frame of reference and everything around them hasn't enabled them to do that. So blimey, I don't know what the solutions to these things are, but I think it would be great for us to be working with more organisations who are doing work at that end of things.
Staying with the graduates and the kind of young talent, obviously what we've been doing for the past 18 months or so has meant that we've got far less contact with our colleagues. Do you think that presents any issues in terms of training for junior members of staff, particularly in terms of the kind of the intangible stuff, the just seeing how the more senior people do things?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, actually, because the what we have done at Murgitroyd, we have about 450 people now and do a lot of training. And what we're finding, actually, that group is that there are more voices in that group saying that they do want to get back to the office, probably proportionately more voices in that group saying that than any other groups. Get back to the office in a kind of bigger way, if you see what I mean. Although even within that group, there are some really interesting nuances to that. So what I've heard, for example, is people saying that the in-person time is really useful for all those kinds of absorption training type. But at the same time, I've had more dedicated time online with the person who's training me or my training supervisor, because we actually allocate time, whereas we didn't really do that before. We just kind of let it happen. So I think that's really interesting. And I think the other thing that we need to think about, and we are thinking about it at Murgitroyd, is making sure that we don't, and it's back to the point, I guess, kind of the point that Alan was making earlier about not just thinking in the old way, that the way we train lawyers, that just by having them around, right, and taking them to meetings and listening to our phone calls and all that kind of thing. We need to be more clever than that. And if we're going to recruit people from other parts of the world and get more diversity that way, then clearly those people aren't going to be in the in our Glasgow office or whatever. So bit of a mixed picture. But to go back to your original question, Lynn, actually, interestingly, we probably had more voices at the trainees, at the younger end of trainees, saying yes, that they think that they do want to get back into the office a bit more than not in the office. There'll be other reasons for that as well, of course. There'll be circumstantial stuff, there'll be living arrangements, there'll be, so it won't just be the training. So we need to look at the whole picture.
I think just from a social perspective as well, I think it's easier to get to know your staff in person when you get that chat with them when you're making a cup of tea. It's just a bit more informal, and you're more likely to get the what did they do at the weekend rather than purely being work focused.
That's true, although it's interesting, when you go out and start listening to people's stories, there's we Murgitroyd had quite a few home workers, as I know lots of us will have done. We had quite a few people who worked permanently at home before the pandemic, so have long experience of that. And I was interested to hear one of our colleagues talking about her experience and saying, I think I've actually met and know more people across this organisation than any of you who were working in offices do. Particularly the Glasgow office is our HQ, and that's the biggest office. So, you know, multi floors. You know, and people would say, well, I do see the people on my floor every day, but actually there are people that remarkably are in the same building, but haven't really seen them between last Christmas party and this Christmas party kind of thing. And it was interesting to hear her perspective in her own house, you know, with actually a brilliant social network right across the organisation.
Yeah, I think let's just jump in. I think again, this is a massively interesting topic. Obviously, people, you know, young lawyers, you know, not just lawyers, but you learn by osmosis. You know, so you're just seeing what's going on, or seeing a crisis being handled, or a difficult client situation, or whatever it will be. So and obviously Teams and Zoom and being remote doesn't bring that opportunity. And also, I think I've spoken to a lot of young lawyers, many of whom are trying to navigate their way through their first hearings, you know, so they're actually appearing in court, which is terrifying in itself by and large. I'm afraid it just usually is. And they often talk about having to just log in for their own hearing and have been denied the chance to see maybe 5, you know, more experienced practitioners do roughly the same thing before them. And also just have the word with a person who's maybe in the room that they can say, I've got this, or I've got this situation, what do you say? Because that type of learning, and that's just not from your own firm, but from, you know, from just colleagues or whatever, is invaluable. So I think I can understand very much why younger lawyers would want to get back into a hybrid element of this type of thing. I think sophisticated businesses will build out really smart ways of integrating new staff and young, you know, people in a way. And one thing I was going to bring up was in terms of driving the business forward. So I hope this is an accurate story about, you know, Google essentially makes its money through AdWords, you know, advertising, and the real driver to solve, they were trying to fix that offering to the market, and it was essentially fixed by an entirely different team that wasn't working on it, who just happened to be leaving the building, and they saw something pinned on the wall about the problem that they were encountering, because the AdWords that were being served up in search weren't relevant to the searcher's intent. And this group actually spent their weekend saying, I think we're working on that, and I think that would kind of fix that. And they came back in on the Monday. And it's just maybe quite an extreme example, but it shows you how just, you know, you're not bouncing off, you know, just these interactions that can happen in a more physical space, and it's very hard to replicate that, you know, in a digital environment. So I think a sweet spot, I saw one company doing, I think it's Basecamp, they do like online, you know, project management, but they have an entirely dispersed workforce by design. But I think they bring people from across the globe for it, you know, like quarterly types of meetings, and just say, we do hook up, we do work, we do have an element of socializing, you know, and that just brings enough kind of nutrients to the business to then say, we go back again to all of our different locations, but we're all kind of connected and enriched. So,
Alistair, I've been interested to look at those kind of companies as well that were distributed for a long time and seem to report really excellent culture and connection and all that kind of thing. How are they doing it, and take some from that. And I wondered with your tech knowledge on things like, you know, training lawyers and some of these challenges, some of these things that have disappeared. Like, I mean, it's a really good kind of very real example. You go to court, you're able to see other people in action, and that's not allowed anymore. I mean, you know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know, but could something very simple be done there? Like, you are allowed in to see, you know, in this format. I mean, that seems like the kind of obvious solution to me. But so there's maybe, I suppose, what I would want to make sure, you know, we're all doing, and you know, I've tried to make sure I'm doing this myself, is not reverting back to the old thinking and thinking, well, we'll have to get our young trainees back in because the way they learn is beside people, so we'll have to get other people in to work beside them as well. Well, we maybe need to do a bit of that because we know there is stuff that's really valuable, but is there something else we need to look to? Is there something different that we need to do to make this work really well? And of course, what we're doing is preparing them for the future. So if the future is going to be more of this and more, even, you know, those who are doing court work, it's going to be more like this. Well, that's what we're preparing them for. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I mean, you know, this might sound a mad point. I think it's something to really think really deeply about. I really think I really do what is going on here. I mean, the point you make about surely we can allow access that other lawyers can see, or, you know, other people can see the hearing taking place and then learn in that fashion. Yeah, it's just getting these, I mean, we're in kind of, I'm not going to say post-pandemic or anything but that, but obviously things have moved on in the last little bit, that people are kind of getting on with some things. And we're in the very early stages of that. And we're now going to come to a point where leadership, which had the jolt of trying to deal with, you know, everything that had happened, the question that's been asked of them is, right, okay, so what are you actually now going to put in place? How flexible is it going to be? How deeply considered is it going to be? And that's going to be really interesting. And, you know, in terms of things like access to justice and using technology, so just to give an example, but the licensing committee, I think in Glasgow, it wasn't online. It didn't use anything. No one went. The lawyers went. You know, but members of the public were profoundly affected, often by licensing for nightclubs and incidents outside them. But they didn't go because they didn't know when it was on. They didn't really know what to do. And then it was placed onto Teams, as I understand it, and then you could log in. If you're an interested party, you could be advised that you'd maybe contributed in some fashion, and they've been able to see, you know, justice obviously has to be seen to be done and all of that. It has to be visible. They've seen a massive increase in engagement around what they're doing, but using what, you know, might be described as a remote technology. So there's a real opportunity there, because they can't, we all want to get back into the licensing committee, or let's, in essence, close it all back down again. That serves no one. So the leadership there will need to say, right, how do we blend this? And I think the answer lies for most things in blending kind of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and, you know, and that's going to just need, I think, emotionally intelligent and technically savvy leadership, really. It's fascinating. It is a fascinating topic going forward, definitely.
Picking up on Alan's comment there again about the social aspects of physical attendance at work, we'd mentioned briefly earlier mental health issues as well. Do you think being at home more, perhaps being isolated or not seeing colleagues, do you think that presents more of a challenge? And in terms of how you might appear to your colleagues, do you think it's more difficult to pick up on perhaps personal issues that people are going through when you're speaking on Zoom or Teams or something like that? Is it easier if you can actually see their demeanour and how they're acting when you see them in person?
Probably. Is the answer. I think, though, and I agree with Alistair. It's, you know, it's fascinating, and it's going to take an awful lot of thinking, and whatever the future holds. And actually, I think that's difficult, and that's often difficult for leaders to sometimes just say, let's not do anything at the moment. I think sometimes we feel we're required to do something, and I think I've seen some organizations kind of going quite quickly with something and saying, right, everybody get back for 3 days a week. And I wonder, I could be completely wrong, but I wonder if to some extent it's because they feel they have to do something and say something because they're the leadership team and they have to get on with doing that. Your question was about, sorry, Lynn, I've taken myself off the point there, haven't I? This was about people, about connections.
That's
about
right.
being able to see how people are on the screen. Well, I just wonder if, I mean, one of the things that we were talking about at Murgitroyd in the future, this sort of blended future, and we were trying to have as much freedom of choice built into that as possible. One of the things that we talk about is that wherever you're working, that it's with a purpose. So if you're going into the office, it's a purposeful visit into the office, either, and that might be to do with resources that you need in the office, or that you work better and more productively there in your situation. Or I would hope a lot of it is about going in to spend time with people, to collaborate, to socialize, and all that kind of thing. And I think, I guess maybe the answer is that we need to make sure that people are in kind of enough and in as purposeful a way to be able to pick up on some of these sort of nuances. But at the same time, we've just said a few points ago that we're going to like having people from across the globe who are working remotely. So, that's not going to work for everyone. So again, it's going to be a real mix of all of these things. Sorry, Rachel, you were going to come in as well.
No, I completely agree with you on all of those points. I mean, our team is small enough and mostly local enough that kind of pitching up on people's doorsteps during the pandemic to make sure they really were all right was actually an option for me. And because so many of them were so far from home, that was hugely important. I mean, seas away from home. But as people were able to go home and then work with their parents in Hong Kong or Lithuania or Brazil or wherever it was, and still remain part of the team, it is much more difficult. And I think the fact that they're not in the office and they might be on their own, you think, oh, they're on their own, so they might be miserable. Actually, they might be with their family and therefore miserable. So actually, it isn't just about, working from home and being stuck in a flat with 2 small children or 6 people who are trying to share the Wi-Fi, or everybody else is asleep and hungover and you're trying to go to work. We don't know what people are up against, and for many people, actually leaving the house is a hugely important part of the day, much more so than they could probably ever really properly articulate. And it is about, for some people, it's just about getting out of the door, isn't it? And getting that foot over the threshold, getting some fresh air, whatever it is. And I think that's what we need to be really mindful of. And we need to encourage others to be mindful of it too. And if we have people overseas who we can't see and pitch up on the doorstep, then we need to have some sort of buddy system going on, so that when you're new, when you're being trained, and I have to say I've been really impressed with the training that we've done, but it's really difficult to train people around physical product when you can't touch it. So we're identifying fakes or helping people identify fakes. You often need to feel these things. And it's really difficult trying to explain to somebody about something they can't hold in their hand and say, well, there's a kind of nodule on the left. And if there's a nodule on the left and not on the right, how do you know which way up the product is? That's been a real challenge for us, the kind of physical descriptions of things. Then I think you just need to be, you ask people what they want. I think that's the other thing. I mean, what you're saying, Helen, about acting quickly in 3 days in the office and all the rest of it. How many surveys have we done? How many times have we asked people what they would like? We just need, we need to listen, not just be imposing our own leadership thoughts on everybody all the time. So I completely agree with all of that.
Yeah, I was going to come in and just say, again, it's another fascinating topic you could talk about for a long, long time. It's really, really interesting because one person's commute, for example, as an employee is potentially hell. They're saying, I'm so frustrated by this. I don't need to I could be at home doing this. And I've heard people saying that. Then the other person is saying, I leave the house, just as you say, Rachel, I go into the train and I put on a podcast, and actually it's my time and it allows me to kind of, set myself up for the working day and all of these things. So again, trying to find a hard and fast rule that says we don't do commuting, or whatever it is actually works for some. Oh, brilliant. And other people say, oh no, I want that. So it's really, really difficult to do that. And just one general point, again, as we think of solutions, we tend to think of them through the prism of what we think that technology is currently and how we can use that. But maybe, it's wise to try to look forward. I know that's sometimes very difficult in relation to technology, but I'm pretty certain that companies like Zoom, and whether it's the metaverse now with Facebook or whatever it is, but we tend to come on to Teams calls for a particular purpose. At 9:30 we will be talking about this, right? And we go on and everyone kind of 2 minutes of hi, how, and then we go into the topic and then we all leave, or there's an extra 5 minutes or whatever of this, that. And we don't tend to see, within that digital environment, we don't see people just at work as you do in an office, because you don't just see them working away. But scary as it might sound, but Zoom and these types of companies are looking at creating spaces, really. So what would happen is that you would have people maybe having the meeting and then you would all just go away and work, a bit like breakout rooms, but kind of just like running, where you're actually in a digital environment and at work, and you might be able to detect, and it might change the dynamic around how people are communicating, and you might be able to identify and say, I don't think that person's doing too well, or maybe need some help with this, or they're struggling, and it's a bit more of a relaxed type of digital experience. That might sound horrifying, it might be a brilliant thing, I don't know, but it is within their contemplation, because these companies obviously do see the limitations. They get the feedback from us that we go, oh, screen, staring at my screen, it's annoying. So they're going to fix that. They're not going to just say that's it. So we'll see what lies ahead.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Our tech teams do that. So some of our tech teams in Shetland and some of them are in Edinburgh, and they have this kind of open thing going on all the time with the camera and the voice. I have to say, I find it extremely odd, but they've really got used to it, and it works really well. I mean, you wouldn't think it would work well, but it really does. And so it's entirely possible. Slightly strange, but I think that might just be my age. They're all much younger and much more brilliant. So actually, they love it. If they love it, as far as I'm concerned, to be encouraged.
I think the key with that is just remembering that you are actually visible to others as well. I think we've got used to this putting off your camera, but just kind of on the hybrid working, and I suppose an attempt to adopt the best of what we used to do and the best of what we do now and make it better going forward. One of the questions we received in advance was, how do we make that kind of hybrid situation work? If you've got some people, for example, in a meeting who are there in person, and you've got some people that are joining remotely, how do you make sure that you get equal levels of participation? It's quite often difficult for people joining remotely to have the same level of involvement as those that are actually there. Do you have any suggestions as to how that might work?
I think we're all learning some new skills on that, to be honest, skills as a participant, depending on where you are, making sure that you're aware of the people around you and the people on the screen beside you, or whatever it is. But particularly what I'm finding at the moment is skills as whoever the host or chair of the meeting is. I think that's a really kind of skillful thing to do. And I think we've probably all learned some of those skills. And I know some organisations have decided that everybody's on their own camera. So even if there's people in a room together, they're all separate on their own camera. They find that works better as a gallery. I don't know. I've kind of done it both ways. And I personally, I think by and large, it can work. We're talking about meetings where there's discussion to be had rather than broadcast meetings, because broadcast meetings don't really matter, do they? Whether you're talking to a gallery or talking to gallery plus people in rooms together. So they're just my musings. Hand over to somebody else that knows a bit more than I do on this.
I would just agree with you. I think the chairing of it is absolutely crucial. But I have to say we've done quite a bit of it, and it seems to be fine with a good chair, just ensuring voices are heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any meeting can be made interesting by somebody running it really well. No matter literally how you can do it in a conference call, it can still work if with no visual element to it, if it's just run correctly and there's a good format. But I do think everything will, I'm going to say improve. I mean, I'm not saying all technological advances do improve things, but I think we'll end up, again, looking back at how we did Zoom calls in the pandemic and how we thought that the future had arrived. A bit like maybe somebody having the black and white telly watching the coronation going, the future's arrived, it will never get any better than this, and it'll just improve as an experience. I think that might be how bigger businesses set out the infrastructure within, if it's if we're talking about a physical and a remote blend of participants in a meeting, it will be how they set up the physical environment in those meeting spaces to make that really work, whether it's individual screens, replicating it. And I think that thing of spaces, and it's very interesting, Rachel, what you're saying, and it does often tend to be your kind of software tech guys who start to adopt tech practices. So they're sitting with cameras on, essentially got their own music on, they're going to reference something or ask a question to their colleague who's, 5 miles, 1,000 miles away, just about a thing that they're working on a shared document at the same time. And it really does work for them, and they don't think anything of it. And we had, that's not widely adopted, but I think it will be more and more prevalent going forward, that type of shared space online will work, and that will happen in meetings too. And we won't think much of having it being a blended environment, and it's not an inferior type of experience for, you would hate to have an outcome where the person who was remote just didn't get their say, or their idea was missed because they weren't there. So leadership, great chairmanship, and technology is going to solve that.
I'm conscious of the time, so I was just going to finish up with one last question, and that was really predictions for the future. How do you see things panning out? Will we still be having this conversation in a year's time, or will we all have got over it and be working flexibly, remotely, hybrid? How do you think things will pan out in the future?
Well, Lynn, none of us predicted the pandemic, so I think that's a dangerous thing for it to even invite us to predict anything. My best guess is 5 years from now, we'll look back at discussions like this and say it all kind of worked out okay, didn't it? And we were worrying about things that we probably didn't really need to worry about, but 'twas ever thus.
I just hope we're more inclusive, more diverse, and more equal.
Yeah, well, I've read something recently saying, be an optimist, but also plan for the worst. And so I think we should think of difficult situations. We've had, the financial crisis, buffeted by things like Brexit, which possibly seems small scale now, I don't know, but the pandemic suddenly comes in, so who knows what's around the corner. So try to build out a resilience plan around that type of thing going forward. But then there's massive opportunities lying going forward. I think we'll never have this fixed in a box ticked. We're always going to be in a state of change. That's the modern world. But I think we're reimagining the world, really. And I think businesses can really build out great diverse teams and really, really push on in a way that we just couldn't do before. So I think it's really exciting, challenging, but really exciting.
Great, thank you. Well, we've had some comments and some questions in the chat, but if anybody has any other final remarks or questions, now is the time, please, because I think we'll just otherwise wrap up as that gets towards the end of our hour. So please do let us know. But otherwise, thank you very much for everybody's participation this morning. It's been a great session and great to hear in particular our panel's views, and thank you again very much to Helen, Rachel, and Ali for coming along this morning and spending some time with us.